Have you ever judged someone by how they looked, and found out, way too late, that they were exactly what you needed? Because this story starts like that, with a man who had everything, absolutely everything, and a woman who, in the eyes of the world, had nothing. And what happened between them on that Tuesday night changed the lives of hundreds of people. But not the way you're thinking right now. Not even close. His name was Richard Caldwell. 47 years old. Owner of a chain of cosmetic clinics that pulled in over $12 million a year. Imported car. Penthouse in Manhattan's Upper West Side. A constant presence in society columns and charity galas. You know the type, that face that shows up smiling in black tie photos, always in a perfect suit, always wearing a watch that cost more than most people make in 5 years. Richard was the portrait of success. At least that's what everyone saw. What nobody saw was what happened when the cameras turned off. What nobody saw was the room on the second floor of the penthouse, the one with the door always closed, with soundproofing he had installed when his son was 3. What nobody saw was the boy. Gabriel. He was 9 years old at the time of this story. Brown hair, enormous eyes, the kind that seemed to see things no adult could perceive. Gabriel was autistic, level 2 support needs. And before anything else, I need you to understand something: autism is not a disease. It's not something that needs a cure. It's a different way of processing the world. But, and here's where things get complicated, when you're the parent of a child on the spectrum, especially when that child has intense sensory meltdowns, the world was not designed for you. Period. Gabriel had meltdowns. Not tantrums. Meltdowns. There's a brutal difference between the two, and most people have no idea. A tantrum is a child wanting something and using behavior to get it. A sensory meltdown is a child's nervous system collapsing because the environment has too many stimuli, too much noise, too much light, wrong texture, strong smell, unfamiliar people too close. The child doesn't want anything. They're suffering. And when Gabriel went into meltdown, there was no negotiating. No calm down, buddy. No bribing with a tablet or ice cream. He screamed. Threw himself on the floor. Hit his head against the wall. Bit his own hands until they bled. And it could last 40 minutes, an hour, sometimes longer. Richard had already hired, and let go, 14 caregivers in 3 years. 14. Occupational therapists, behavioral psychologists, therapeutic companions with international certifications. They all came with their impressive resumes, their methodologies with complicated names, their careful promises. And every single one of them, without exception, reached the same point: Mr. Caldwell, Gabriel's case is complex. Complex. It was always that word. As if complex were a diagnosis and not a confession of helplessness. Gabriel's mother, Richard's ex-wife, Vanessa, had left the picture 2 years earlier. Not because she didn't love her son. I need to make that clear. Vanessa loved Gabriel with an intensity that consumed her. And that's exactly what happened, it consumed her. She had a nervous breakdown at 38. Severe parental burnout. Spent 3 months in a residential treatment center in Connecticut. When she came out, the doctor said she needed distance. Not emotional distance, physical distance. The constant crisis environment was literally killing her. So Vanessa moved to Portland. Called every day on video. Sent gifts. But she wasn't there. And Richard, who during the marriage delegated 90% of Gabriel's care to Vanessa and the caregivers, suddenly found himself alone. Alone with a child he loved more than his own life, but whom he had no idea how to reach. This is something nobody talks about when it comes to parenting a neurodivergent child. You can love your kid with every fiber of your being and still not have the slightest clue how to help them. And that helplessness, that feeling that you fail every single day at the most important job there is, eats you from the inside in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Richard started drinking. Not much, at first. A glass of bourbon after putting Gabriel to bed. Then 2. Then the bottle was half empty before midnight. He didn't drink to have fun. He drank to numb that quiet guilt that kept hammering, "You're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough." And look at the irony, Richard Caldwell, the man who sold cosmetic transformation to thousands of clients, who promised in his clinic's commercials that everyone deserves to feel good about themselves, couldn't look in the mirror without feeling ashamed. Now, the other side of the story. The restaurant was called Nana Lena's Kitchen. It sat on a dead-end street in the Astoria neighborhood of Queens. It wasn't pretty. The facade was old brick with faded signage from the 80s. The tables were worn wood with checkered tablecloths. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard, and the house specialty was a lasagna that cost $14.95, which, for the record, was probably the best lasagna in all of New York City. But nobody from the society columns would ever know that because people like Richard Caldwell didn't eat at places like Nana Lena's Kitchen. Nana Lena, by the way, had died in 2018. The person running the restaurant now was her granddaughter, a 32-year-old woman named Beatrice Santos. B to pretty much everyone. And she's the waitress in this story. Except calling B a waitress is, technically correct, but it's like calling the ocean water. She was a waitress, yes. She was also the cook when her Aunt Marlene called in sick. She was also the cashier, the janitor, the amateur accountant, and on Friday nights, the person who climbed onto the little stool in the corner and sang off-key jazz standards while the regulars clapped along. B didn't have a college degree. She'd barely finished high school, because at 17 she got pregnant by her boyfriend at the time, a guy named Vinny who promised the world and delivered a note that said, "I need to find myself," stuck to the fridge with an ice cream magnet. She had the baby alone. Marcus. At the time of this story, Marcus was 14 and was a lanky, slightly awkward kid who spent his days at the restaurant helping his mom between homework assignments. B worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. The restaurant barely broke even, it covered the bills, paid the rent on their 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, and left just enough for Marcus to have internet and decent sneakers. That was her life. And she didn't complain. Not out of resignation, B simply had a different relationship with the world. She said she inherited it from her grandmother. Nana Lena always said that complaining is like rocking in a rocking chair, takes effort, but gets you nowhere. But there's a detail about B that changes everything. A detail that, at this point in the story, I'm going to drop like it's nothing, like it's just some random piece of information. Pay attention, because this is going to matter a lot later. B had a younger brother. Lucas. Lucas was autistic. Level 3 support needs, more intense than Gabriel. Lucas lived with B from the time he was 12 until he was 22, when he finally got a spot in a group home run by the state. For 10 years, B was her brother's primary caregiver. Not because it was her obligation. Because their mother died in a bus accident when Lucas was 11, and their father, well, their father never really existed. There was a name on a birth certificate and a vague memory of a man who smelled like cigarettes and who disappeared before Lucas turned 2. So B learned. Not at a university, not from a course, not from a book. She learned in the trenches. Learned at 3 in the morning when Lucas woke up in panic because the sound of wind against the window was unbearable for him. Learned when he refused to eat anything with the wrong texture and she spent hours mashing, straining, experimenting until she found the consistency he'd accept. Learned when he had a meltdown on the subway and everyone stared with that face, you know the face. That mix of judgment and discomfort people make when they see a child screaming in public and decide, in 2 seconds flat, that it's the parent's fault. B knew things about autism that most professionals take years to learn. But she didn't know that she knew. To her, it was just life. Just what had to be done. Okay. Now let me bring these two worlds together. It was a Tuesday. March 12th. It was raining in New York, that thick spring rain that turned streets into rivers in 15 minutes. Richard was driving back from a meeting in Midtown with Gabriel in the back seat. The sitter of the day, the 15th attempt, a young woman named Amanda who'd started the week before, had called 20 minutes earlier saying she wasn't coming back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but I'm not equipped for this. Gabriel, he needs someone specialized. I'm just a babysitter." Richard hung up the phone and sat staring at the gridlocked traffic with that expression he knew well, the expression of someone holding back tears because they can't fall apart in front of their child. Gabriel was relatively calm at that moment. Relatively. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones, a professional studio-grade model that cost almost $400 and was, without exaggeration, the most important object in his life. When the headphones were on, Gabriel could exist in the world. Without them, the world was too much. Too much noise, too much stimulation, everything too much. They were on the Queensboro Bridge approach when traffic locked up completely. A flooded intersection had blocked the road 3 blocks ahead. The GPS rerouted through Astoria. Richard turned right, went down a street he didn't know, and the car died. Just shut off. Engine flooded. Dashboard lights flickering. He tried to restart. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. And then it started, that sound. The sound of rain on the car roof changed. It got louder, more metallic, more invasive. And the noise canceling on Gabriel's headphones, the battery had died. A $40 rechargeable battery, and he'd forgotten to charge it the night before. Without the headphones working, the sound of the rain came in. And with the rain came a car alarm down the street. And a truck horn. And a construction site 2 blocks away. All of it at once. Gabriel pulled off the headphones and started rocking his body forward and back. That was the first sign, self-regulation. The body trying to organize itself. Richard knew the signs. Knew he had, at most, 2 or 3 minutes before the meltdown erupted. "Gabriel, it's okay, buddy. Dad's here. We're gonna get out of the car, okay? It'll be quick." But Gabriel was no longer processing words. When the sensory system goes into overload, language is one of the first things to shut down. Richard's words were just more noise. More stimulus. More, too much. Gabriel started screaming. That scream that has no word, a guttural, primal sound that comes from a place of pure suffering. He slammed his hands over his ears. Started banging his head against the headrest. Richard panicked. Got out of the car in the rain, opened the back door, tried to get Gabriel out, and the boy thrashed with a force that seemed impossible for a 9-year-old. It's adrenaline. A body in meltdown releases adrenaline as if facing mortal danger, because, for Gabriel's brain, he was in mortal danger. The sensory pain he felt was as real as a burn. Richard was drenched, holding his thrashing son, in the middle of a street he didn't know, with the car dead, no sitter, no one. And he did the only thing he could, looked around, desperate, and saw the sign. Nana Lena's kitchen. He picked up Gabriel, the boy kicking, screaming, biting his own arm, and walked in. It was 7:30 at night. The restaurant had about a dozen customers. The noise of the door being shoved open made everyone look. And what they saw was this, a man in a soaked suit, with a face full of desperation, carrying a child who was screaming as if the world were ending. The silence that fell over that restaurant lasted about 3 seconds. Then came the murmur. The stares. A couple near the window exchanged that look of disapproval. The woman frowned, the man shook his head. An older woman said, loud enough for Richard to hear, "My God, what a badly behaved child." Badly behaved. It's incredible how 2 words can hurt so much when you're already on the ground. Richard sat in the first spot he could find, a bench near the kitchen door, and tried to contain Gabriel. Tried the containment hold the occupational therapist had taught him. Tried deep pressure. Tried speaking softly. Tried singing that song that sometimes worked at home. Nothing. Gabriel was in full collapse. Face red, neck veins bulging, hands bleeding from biting. And Richard started to cry. Right there, in the middle of a restaurant full of strangers, under all those stares, the man who graced magazine covers, who closed multi-million-dollar deals, who the whole world thought had the perfect life, crumbled. He cried like he hadn't cried since Vanessa left. Cried from helplessness, from exhaustion, from guilt, from loneliness. Cried because he loved his son too much and couldn't do the one thing a father should be able to do, protect his child from pain. And that's when Bea appeared. She was in the kitchen when she heard the noise. Dried her hands on her apron, came out through the side door, and saw the scene. It didn't take 2 seconds for her to understand what was happening. 10 years caring for Lucas had given her a kind of radar. She looked at Gabriel and didn't see a badly behaved child. She saw a boy in sensory meltdown. She saw the signs, the rocking, the hands over the ears, the biting, the wordless scream. And she saw the father. She saw the real desperation. The first thing Bea did was nothing. She didn't run over. Didn't shout. Didn't offer help. She stood about 10 feet away, watching. And that, what looked like inaction, was the smartest thing anyone could do in that moment. Because when an autistic child is in meltdown, the worst thing is to add another stimulus. Another person, another voice, another unfamiliar smell, another unfamiliar touch. Bea knew this in her body. After about 30 seconds of watching, she moved. But she didn't go to Gabriel. She went to the light switches. And she turned off half the lights. The restaurant went dim. Not dark, dim. That half light that takes the visual aggression out of the environment. 2 customers complained immediately. "Hey, what happened to the lights?" Bea ignored them. Then she went to the speaker behind the counter. The restaurant had been playing a jazz playlist, Miles Davis, Coltrane, that sort of thing. Medium volume. Bea turned it off. Silence. And then the silence revealed the other sounds, the TV in the corner playing the news, the drink fridge humming, the ceiling fan creaking. Bea turned off the TV. She couldn't do anything about the fridge or the fan, but she'd already reduced at least 60% of the sound stimulation in the room. All of this took less than a minute. And she did it without saying a word. Without asking permission. Without explaining. The customers were confused. Some annoyed. The couple by the window asked for the check. The woman who had called Gabriel badly behaved sat there with her mouth open. Bea came back near Richard and Gabriel. Now she crouched, slowly, no sudden movements, about 6 feet from them. Didn't touch. Didn't speak. She did something that, to anyone watching from the outside, must have looked completely insane. She started rocking her body. Forward and back. In the same rhythm as Gabriel. Exactly the same rhythm. This is called mirroring. It's a co-regulatory technique. When you mirror the movement of a person in meltdown, their brain starts to register, unconsciously, that there's someone on the same wavelength. It's not invasive. It's not verbal. It's physical. It's primal. It predates language. And it works. Not immediately. It took about 4 or 5 minutes, which, in the middle of that situation, felt like 4 or 5 hours. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, Gabriel's screaming started to fade. It didn't stop, it faded. His body kept rocking, but the intensity was dropping. Richard noticed the change before he understood what was causing it. He looked at Bea, this unknown woman, crouched on the restaurant floor, rocking her body as if it were the most normal thing in the world, and understood nothing. But he didn't interrupt. Because, for the first time in months, something was working. After another couple of minutes, Bea made her next move. Without stopping the rocking, she placed both palms flat on the tile floor. And started tapping lightly. Rhythmically. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Like a heartbeat. Thump thump thump. Gabriel heard it. His eyes, which had been squeezed shut, opened a sliver. He looked at her hands on the floor. And, this made Richard hold his breath. Gabriel took his hands off his ears. And placed them on the floor. And started tapping. Thump thump thump. Same rhythm. They stayed there, the two of them, tapping their hands on the cold tile floor of the restaurant, in that steady rhythm, while the whole world outside could be falling apart and it didn't matter. It was just that. Thump thump thump. After a few more minutes, the screaming stopped. Gabriel's breathing started slowing down. His body started to relax. And then he did something that, according to Richard, almost never happened with strangers. Gabriel looked at B. Looked into her eyes. For 1 second. Maybe 2. And looked away. For someone who doesn't know autism, that might seem small. For someone who does, that's enormous. Eye contact with a stranger during a meltdown is virtually unheard of. It means that, on some level, Gabriel registered B as safe. B stayed on the floor. Didn't move. Didn't try to push for more interaction. She understood that one look was already everything. And she waited. Gabriel curled up in the corner of the bench. Pulled his knees to his chest. Made himself small. And went quiet. The meltdown had passed. Richard was in shock. Not the bad kind, the other kind. The kind you feel when you witness something that shouldn't be possible and you need time to process that it actually happened. He looked at B and said, his voice breaking, How did you do that? And her answer, BEA's answer, is something I'll never forget telling. She shrugged. Literally shrugged. And said, he didn't need someone to calm him down. He needed someone who understood that he was trying to calm himself down. I just took away the noise that was getting in the way. And she stood up. And asked if they wanted a glass of water. Like nothing had happened. Richard stayed. Ordered the water. Ordered a plate of lasagna, which Gabriel didn't eat because the texture wasn't right for him, but Richard ate it and said it was the best lasagna he'd ever had in his life, and I believe him, because when you're emotionally destroyed, real food heals in a way no Michelin-starred restaurant can. While he ate, Richard watched B work. Watched how she moved through the restaurant, unhurried, unaffected, with the natural ease of someone who's home. Watched how she dealt with the customers who'd been annoyed by the lights going off, with good humor, without apologizing, without making a scene. The lights glitched, folks. Feels like a candle at dinner, doesn't it? And he noticed something specific, when Gabriel, still curled up on the bench, started lightly tapping his fingers on the table, a self-stimulatory behavior. They call it stimmying. B walked past and, without stopping, without looking directly, tapped her fingers 3 times on the counter. Same rhythm. And kept walking. Gabriel stopped. Looked in her direction. And started tapping again. And the next time she walked by, she did it again. It was a dialogue. Silent, rhythmic, almost invisible. But it was a dialogue. Richard finished the lasagna, paid the bill, tried to leave a $200 tip, and B refused, saying, "Sir, that's more than the whole bill, I can't take that," and left. But before leaving, he asked for her phone number. And here I need to pause and talk about something important regarding how we build stories in our heads. Because at this point in the story, I know what you're thinking. You're building a movie in your head. The millionaire meets the humble waitress. She has a special gift. He falls in love. They get together. Her life changes. Happy ending. Right? That's the script we've been trained to expect. The modern Cinderella. The waitress and the prince. And that expectation you're feeling right now, is exactly the trap. Because real life doesn't work like that. And this story isn't about romance. So hold on to that. Hold on to that expectation. And pay attention to what actually happened. Richard called B the next day. He was direct. He wanted to hire her as Gabriel's caregiver. Offered $15,000 a month. For a woman who made about $2,800 at the restaurant, it was a fortune. B said no. Richard figured she was negotiating. Offered $20,000. B said no again. He was confused. Beatrice, forgive my bluntness, but I'm offering more than most professionals in the field make. Why not? And she said, because I'm not a professional in the field. I'm a waitress. And what I did last night, I did because I know that kind of suffering. But that doesn't qualify me to take care of your son every day. That would be irresponsible. Richard insisted. Explained the situation, the 14 caregivers, the sitter who quit, the lack of options. Explained that Gabriel, the morning after the incident at the restaurant, had done something unprecedented. He sat at the breakfast table and tapped his fingers on the surface. Thump thump thump, and looked at his father, waiting. He was reproducing the interaction with B. He was, in his own way, asking for it to happen again. When Richard told her this, B went silent for a long time on the phone. Then she said, I'm not going to be a caregiver. But I can come by some afternoons. To get to know him. For my brother, what worked was routine and predictability. If Gabriel accepts me, we'll figure it out from there. And that was it. No contract, no formality, no $15,000. B started coming to Richard's penthouse 3 afternoons a week, after the lunch rush at the restaurant. And what happened during those afternoons, this is where the story changes direction. Because it wasn't therapy. B didn't apply any technique with a name. Didn't follow any protocol. What she did was, and I need to be careful describing this without romanticizing it, she simply was present. In the right way. On the first day, she walked into Gabriel's room, sat on the floor 10 feet from him, and did nothing. Just sat there. Quiet. Gabriel, who was lining up toy cars in a perfect row, one of his favorite activities, ignored her completely. B sat on the floor for 40 minutes without saying a word. Then she got up and left. Richard, who'd been spying through the cracked door, was stunned. B, you didn't do anything. Yes, I did. I showed him that I can be in his space without invading it. On the second day, same thing. Sat on the floor. Stayed quiet. But this time, after about 20 minutes, she pulled a box of colored pencils from her bag and started drawing on the floor. She'd brought a large sheet of paper. She didn't offer it to Gabriel. Didn't say, want to draw with me? She just started drawing. Gabriel, at some point, turned his head and looked. Looked for about 10 seconds. Then went back to his cars. On the third day, when B started drawing, Gabriel got up, walked over to her, still without looking directly at her, and sat down about a foot away. Didn't pick up a pencil. Didn't draw. But sat close. And that, for anyone who understands, is the first yes. The first, I accept your presence in my orbit. B didn't react. Didn't smile exaggeratedly. Didn't say, oh how nice that you came over. She just kept drawing. And when Gabriel reached out and picked up a blue pencil, she didn't stop what she was doing. He made one mark. A single blue scribble in the corner of the paper. And put the pencil back. B looked at the scribble and made a sound, a low hum, barely audible. Acknowledgement without invasion. And kept drawing. The weeks went by. And the progress was slow, so slow that if you recorded it on video and showed someone, they'd say, nothing's happening. But it was. In the second week, Gabriel could be in the same room as B without visible anxiety. In the third, he allowed proximity of less than 3 feet. In the fourth, something surprising started happening. Gabriel began bringing objects near B. He didn't hand them to her. He placed them on the floor, about a foot away, and retreated. A toy car. A Lego piece. A bottle cap. Gifts, in his nonverbal vocabulary. Offers of interaction. B received each object with the same gravity. Looked at it. Touched it. Returned it to his space. And in the fifth week, Gabriel spoke. He had language, he wasn't nonverbal. But he used words only in very specific contexts, usually memorized scripts from cartoons. He rarely initiated spontaneous communication. That afternoon, B was drawing what appeared to be a very badly done cat. Gabriel looked at the drawing, looked at her, and said, "Wrong. Cats have whiskers." B stopped, looked at the drawing, looked at Gabriel, and said, "You're right. Draw them for me." Gabriel picked up the black pencil, drew 6 lines on the cat's snout, 3 on each side, perfectly symmetrical, and put the pencil down. When B told Richard about this later, he cried. Again. But this time it was a different kind of crying. Now, I need to tell you what was going on in Richard's head during this period. Because this is where things start to get really complicated. Richard was impressed. Legitimately impressed. But the way he processed that impression was the problem. He watched what B did with Gabriel and thought, "This is incredible. This needs to be replicated. This could help other children." And for a businessman like Richard, this could help other children automatically translated to, this could be a business. Not out of malice. I want to make that absolutely clear. Richard wasn't a villain. He wasn't scheming. He was doing what he knew how to do. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're a successful entrepreneur, every solution looks like a scalable business model. Richard started researching, talked to consultants, hired a content team, and in 2 weeks, he had a plan. A grand, ambitious, and, in his mind, profoundly beneficial plan. He was going to create a clinic. A chain of clinics, actually, that's how he thought, always in chains, always at scale. Clinics specializing in autism, with an innovative approach based on what he internally called the Beatrice method. Integrative sensory therapy focused on nonverbal co-regulation and attentive presence. He already had the name. Already had the logo. Already had the financial projections, and the numbers were astronomical, because the market for autism therapies in the United States is worth billions and demand massively outstrips supply. Richard saw a golden opportunity. And, in his worst moments of self-delusion, he believed, sincerely believed, that he was doing something noble. That he was taking BEA's talent and giving it the platform it deserved. That he was democratizing access to an approach that worked. Sounds nice, right? Sounds nice. Hold that thought. Richard invited B for a talk. Took her to an upscale restaurant in the West Village, not the restaurant, a place with linen tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. B showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. Not because she was trying to be authentic or rebellious, she literally didn't own anything else appropriate and wasn't about to spend money she didn't have to impress anyone. During dinner, Richard laid out the plan. With a folder. With slides on a tablet. With financial projections and market analysis. He offered B the role of Director of Methodology for the new clinic chain. Salary of $40,000 a month. Profit sharing. Premium health insurance. Education for Marcus at a top private school. BEA's life would change completely. She could close the restaurant. Could give her son everything she never had. Could stop counting pennies at the end of the month. Richard presented everything with passion, with eloquence, with that energy of someone selling both the idea and themselves at the same time. And at the end of the pitch, he asked, "So, B? What do you say?" B sat looking at him for a long time. Took a sip of water. Looked out the restaurant window. And said, "Richard, what I do with Gabriel isn't a method." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "It's not a method. It's not a technique. It's not something you package and sell. It's presence. It's knowing someone. It's paying attention. It's going slow when the whole world is telling you to go fast. You can't train someone to do this in a 3-week classroom and charge $200 a session." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, That smile of someone who's heard objections in negotiations before and knows how to work around them. B, I get it. I respect your humility. But think about the impact. There are thousands of children like Gabriel in this country who have no access to anything. The parents are desperate. If we can train professionals in your approach, it's not my approach, Richard. It's common sense. It's patience. And patience doesn't sell because you can't put it on a brochure. Anything can be systematized. People can't be systematized. BEA's voice rose for the first time. And in that instant, something shifted in the air between them. And he began doing something new, something the therapist said was significant. He would go to his bedroom door, knock 3 times on the wall, and wait. Thump thump thump, and wait. And when nobody answered in the right rhythm, the meltdown came. He was calling for B. The only way he knew how. Richard tried to hire another caregiver. Tried another therapist. Tried to replicate what B did himself, sat on the floor, tried the mirroring, tried the rhythm. But Gabriel turned his back. Because it was never about the technique. It was never about the technique. It was about the person. It was about that specific woman who, for reasons that even she couldn't fully explain, could exist in Gabriel's space in a way that made sense to his nervous system. And when she was gone, Gabriel's nervous system registered loss. One more person who left his orbit. Just like his mother. 2 months went by. BEA's restaurant nearly shut down. A ceiling leak in the kitchen during the spring rains caused damage that cost nearly $8,000 to fix, money B didn't have. She borrowed from one person, then another, scraped together what she could, and still came up short. Marcus needed new school supplies. The rent was late. And B, that woman who didn't complain, who said complaining was a rocking chair, started to feel the weight. She didn't complain out loud. But Marcus noticed. Noticed his mom slept less. Smiled less. Sang less on Fridays. And it was Marcus who, one night, after finishing his homework at the empty restaurant's kitchen table, said, "Mom, why don't you just take the money from that guy?" "What guy?" "Gabriel's dad." "Because it's not right, Marcus." "Why isn't it right?" And B couldn't answer in a way that made sense to a 14-year-old. How do you explain to a teenager that there are things that can't be bought, not out of pride, but because the act of buying them destroys them? Meanwhile, Richard was drowning in the clinic project. The numbers weren't adding up. The therapists trained in the active presence method weren't delivering consistent results. 3 families filed lawsuits demanding refunds. A parenting blog published a piece titled "Millionaire Profits Off His Own Autistic Son" that went viral and sparked a wave of backlash. Richard started drinking again. More than before. And his relationship with Gabriel, which had improved so much during the time with B, went back to square one. Or worse. Because now Gabriel had tasted something good and lost it. And loss, for the autistic brain, is an earthquake. The routine shattered. The predictability vanished. And the boy who had started saying spontaneous words, who had drawn whiskers on a cat, who had created a tapping dialogue with a waitress from Queens, shut down. One night, a Thursday, raining again, felt like fate. Richard was sitting in the living room of the penthouse at 11 at night with a bottle of bourbon half gone. Gabriel was in his room, silent, which was sometimes worse than the screaming, because the silence meant he had given up trying to communicate. Richard's phone rang. It was Vanessa. His ex-wife. She called every day at 9 for a video call with Gabriel, but that night she was late. "Richard, how is he?" And Richard, for the first time, didn't lie. Didn't say, "He's doing okay." Didn't say, "Good days and bad days." He said, "Vanessa, I'm losing him. I'm losing our son and I don't know what to do." And he cried. Again. For the 1000th time. But this time was different. This time there was surrender in the crying. A letting go. That point where pride finally wears out and the person says, "I can't do this alone." Vanessa listened. And said something simple, "Then ask for help, Richard. But ask for real. Don't ask the businessman way. Ask the father way." Richard hung up. Sat there for an hour, staring at nothing. And then he did something he hadn't done in a long time, wrote an honest message. No strategy. No rhetoric. No plan. He sent it to B at 12:23 in the morning. The message said, "B. I was wrong. I tried to turn something pure into a commodity. I tried to put a price on what has no price. And the one who paid was Gabriel. I'm not asking you to come back and work for me. I'm not asking you anything professional. I'm asking you, as a father who's at rock bottom, help. Please." He knocks on the wall every night. 3 times. And waits. And nobody answers. B read the message at 6 the next morning. Read it while opening the restaurant, apron already tied, coffee brewing in the old drip pot her grandmother used. And she cried. Not for Richard. For Gabriel. For the boy who knocked on the wall and waited. Thump thump thump. Because she knew that kind of waiting. Knew it in her body. Lucas used to do the same thing when she left for work, knock on the bedroom door, rhythmically, waiting for her to come back. And each knock was a question, "Are you still there?" B went to the penthouse that afternoon. Didn't call ahead. Just showed up. The doorman buzzed Richard, who came down in flip-flops and a wrinkled shirt, a far cry from the Richard of the magazines. He opened his mouth to speak and B raised her hand. "You don't need to say anything. I didn't come for you. I came for Gabriel. And I have conditions." 3. Richard nodded. "First, you shut down the clinic. The whole thing with the method and my name, it's over. I was already thinking of. Second, you delete all the content about Gabriel from social media. All of it. Every photo, every post, every reel. His story is not content." Richard swallowed hard. That meant losing 150,000 followers. Losing sponsorship deals. Admitting publicly that he'd been wrong. "Done," he said. Third, and here B hesitated. Not from insecurity, from care. She was about to ask the hardest thing. "Third, you're going to learn. I'm not going to be around forever. I have my life, my restaurant, my son. I'll come here, I'll be with Gabriel, but you're going to be there too. Not spying through the door. There. On the floor. In silence. Learning to listen to your son. Because at the end of the day, Richard, the one who needs to be there for him, is you. Not me. Not a therapist. Not a caregiver. You. Richard, the entrepreneur who built an empire of cosmetic clinics, who spent hours in meetings deciding the exact shade of blue for the company logo, who understood marketing, finance, scaling, had to learn to sit on the floor. And stay. Without doing anything. Let me tell you how the following months went. Because this is where the story turns into something else. Something I'm not sure how to name. Richard started sitting on the floor of Gabriel's room. In the beginning, Gabriel didn't accept his presence there. Got agitated. Flapped his hands. Turned his back. Because for Gabriel, his father was the person who tried. Who tried to contain, tried to calm, tried to talk, tried to fix. And every attempt was an invasion. B would sit on the other side of the room and do nothing. And tell Richard, do nothing. But do nothing. But I need to. Richard. Do. Nothing. And Richard, the man who didn't know how to be still, who was terrified of emptiness, who filled every second with action, decision, progress, had to learn the art of doing nothing. And let me tell you, that is the hardest art there is. Because doing nothing when your child is suffering in front of you takes a kind of courage that no business school teaches. It requires trusting that inaction is, in that moment, the most powerful action. That silent presence is stronger than any word. That being is more than doing. It took weeks. Weeks where Richard sat on the floor and broke into cold sweats from anxiety. Weeks where every cell in his body screamed, "Do something," and he had to ignore it. B didn't scold, didn't praise, didn't push. She just said, every now and then, "That's good. Breathe." And Richard breathed. And one day, a regular day, an ordinary Tuesday, Gabriel was lining up his cars. Richard was sitting on the floor. B wasn't there. It was a day she didn't come. And Gabriel, without warning, without transition, picked up a blue car, walked over to his father, and placed it on the floor beside his leg. And went back to his row. Richard looked at the car. And understood. It was a gift. The same kind of gift Gabriel used to give B in the beginning. An offer of interaction. An "I accept you in my space." Richard stayed very still. Picked up the car carefully. Looked at it. And placed it back on the floor, about a foot from where Gabriel had left it. Like B would have done. And Gabriel looked. Looked at the car. Looked at his father. And did something he hadn't done with Richard in over a year. Sat close to him. Didn't lean against him. Didn't speak. But sat close. And they stayed there, the two of them, in silence, on the floor of the room that smelled like plastic cars and colored pencils, while the city outside made noise and the world outside demanded speed and results and engagement and metrics, and none of it mattered. When Richard told B about this the next day, she didn't cry. Didn't celebrate. She smiled in a sort of lopsided way and said, "Now you're starting to get it." Get what? That your son didn't need a method. He needed a father. And that phrase, "he needed a father," seared into Richard's mind like a brand. Because it was true. And it was the truth that hurt the most. He'd spent a fortune trying to outsource what only he could give. He'd turned into a business what should have been a relationship. He'd searched the world for the answer that was on the other side of his own son's bedroom door. Now I need to tell you the part of the story that changes everything. The part that, when you hear it, is going to make you go back to the beginning and rethink every detail. Remember I told you to pay attention to the breadcrumbs? Right. Nana Lena never existed. It was Helena. And the restaurant that be kept open, the old brick facade with faded signage, the $14.95 lasagna, the chalkboard menu written by hand, it was the last piece of her mother that still existed in the world. When the kitchen ceiling burst during the spring rains and B spent her last penny to fix it, she wasn't saving a business. She was saving a grave. The only place where Helena and Lucas were still alive in some way. And now rethink. Rethink B refusing the $200 tip. It wasn't modesty. It was a woman who learned, in the worst possible way, that accepting financial help from strangers always comes with an invisible price. Her mother accepted help from men her whole life, and every one of those helps cost a piece of her dignity. Rethink B refusing the $40,000 a month and the new life. It wasn't naivete. It was a deliberate choice to protect the only thing she had that money couldn't replace, the freedom to help out of love and not out of contract. Rethink the moment she turned off the restaurant lights without asking anyone's permission. It wasn't instinct. It was a woman who learned, at 17, that when someone is in crisis, you don't ask permission. You act. Because asking permission is a luxury for those who have time, and crisis doesn't wait. And rethink the final moment, the moment she said, he needed a father. She wasn't just talking to Richard. She was talking to the ghost of her own father who disappeared. To every father who disappears. To the idea that presence, simple, quiet, imperfect presence, is the most valuable thing one human being can give to another. And that she, B, had to learn this the worst way possible. By losing. Richard did what B asked. Shut down the clinic. Took the financial hit. Deleted all the content about Gabriel, lost the followers, lost the sponsorship deals, lost the public persona. And gained his son. Not all at once. Not with a cinematic embrace. He gained him slowly, on the floor of the bedroom, day after day, in silence, learning the language Gabriel had always spoken and that nobody had bothered to learn. B stayed at the restaurant. She didn't get rich. Didn't become famous. The restaurant still barely breaks even. Marcus is taking his college entrance exams next year and B doesn't know how she'll pay for it. The kitchen ceiling makes a weird sound when it rains. And on Fridays, she still climbs onto the little stool and sings off-key jazz. But one thing changed. Every Saturday morning, Richard and Gabriel show up at the restaurant for breakfast. Gabriel orders the same thing every time, toast with no crust and butter, cut into 4 exactly equal triangles. And at some point during the morning, B walks past their table and taps 3 times on the counter. Thump thump thump, and Gabriel looks up, and taps 3 times on the table. Thump thump thump, and that's the entire dialogue. 3 taps and 3 taps. And it's enough. It's more than enough. Because the lesson of this story, the lesson I want you to carry when this audio ends, isn't that the waitress had a magical gift. It's not that the millionaire learned to be humble. It's not that autism needs some special approach nobody knows about. The lesson is simpler and more brutal than that. The lesson is that we live in a world that turns everything into a product. Everything. Love becomes content. Pain becomes engagement. Care becomes a method. Presence becomes protocol. Vulnerability becomes a personal brand. And in the process of packaging and selling, we lose the thing itself. The real, raw, imperfect, human thing. B didn't save Gabriel. She didn't perform a miracle. She did the oldest and most forgotten thing in the world. She paid attention. She stayed quiet. She respected another person's rhythm. And she didn't try to gain anything from it. And that refusal to turn the human into a commodity, is the most radical act anyone can commit today. In a world that monetizes every second of your attention, choosing to give attention for free, without expectation, without return, without content, is the simplest and the hardest thing there is. It's sitting on the floor. It's waiting. It's tapping 3 times and hearing 3 taps back. Thump thump thump. We overcomplicate everything. We professionalize everything. We scale everything. And the answer, so often, is small enough to fit inside 3 taps on the floor of a restaurant in Queens, on a rainy night, between a woman who carried the ghost of the brother she lost and a boy who just wanted someone to stay quiet beside him. Before I finish, one last thing. Something I held back until now because I wanted you to hear everything else first. The message Richard sent B at midnight, that desperate, honest, strategy-free message, wasn't the first message B received that night. At 11:47, 36 minutes before Richard's message, B had received another message. From Marcus. Her 14-year-old son. It said, "Mom, I know you've been sad because of Gabriel. I know you don't want me to notice, but I notice. You did the right thing. You always do the right thing. Lucas would be proud. I am." B had never told Marcus about Lucas. Never said her brother's name, never explained the meltdowns, never described the years of care. Marcus was a kid who grew up in the restaurant, between pots and pans and overdue bills, listening to his mom sing off-key on Fridays. And somehow, in that mysterious way kids have of knowing things nobody told them, he knew. He knew about the brother. He knew about the pain. He knew his mother carried something heavy. And he sent that message because he did the same thing his mother did better than anyone in the world. He paid attention. In silence. Without invading. And at the right moment, said the right thing. 3 sentences. No method. No protocol. No degree. Thump thump thump,